Good evening.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to Season 4, Episode 2 of Inside the Rookery. So today I'm joined by Andy Leask and Mark Gibbons as we say hello to our guest, artist Erin H Rea. Andy Law is sadly still ill, so we're sending him our love, and I'm occasionally muting myself so you can't hear him coughing.
Oh, God.
So, as always, we have a collection of pre-submitted questions from our Discord community and our patrons, but please do make your own comments and add questions in the chat as always. And as ever, stick around to the end. Why am I saying as ever? It's like literally this week we're doing this. Stick around to the end when we will be drawing the second set of Inside the Spookery birthday prizes. So, before we get on to the questions, Erin, would you like to say hello and introduce yourself?
Erin is currently muted as well.
I'm trying to unmute Erin, but it's not letting me.
Oh.
It seems to be a bit of an issue. Scribble Imp may be the best moniker ever. We'll just talk about Erin while she tries to fix her sound issues.
Yeah, it's not letting me unmute her either.
I'm going to remove her and add her again.
I don't think she can hear us either.
No.
No, it's weird. Right. Why don't we, in the meantime, we'll message Erin. Just, chat amongst
We'll talk amongst ourselves.
Let's talk amongst ourselves. So as I was saying before we went live, in terms of what qualifies as, because the subject is creating new classics in RPG, and I was ruminating on what made something a classic, and it's got to be more than just quality plus time. Andy, what are your thoughts on defining a classic?
I mean, it's hard because it is that. I think quality and time are probably the two main ingredients, and it's that sense of longevity, it's that sense of remaining valid. Like there are a lot of Elizabethan playwrights, and a lot of those plays they wrote were good, and like some of Ben Jonson's ones are very good. But there's a reason why Shakespeare's Shakespeare, right? Like there is something different, and it's not just that they're good. Like there's some very clever stuff in Volpone, for instance, by Ben Jonson, but there's something. Again, it's a cliche and not a very helpful term, but there's something timeless about a lot of Shakespeare's characters. There's something like universal, so it resonates with audiences, and sure, some of them resonate less. You watch Taming of the Shrew nowadays, like maybe not so much,
right.
but the central struggle at the heart of Hamlet or Macbeth or any of those, that have stuck around for a long time, there's something recognizable there. And even if you go back to the Greeks, like, you watch, I don't know, Medea, right? Like, I'm assuming none of our audience have ever been so consumed with jealousy and anger that they've murdered their own children. But you can relate to that woman's plight. You can relate to the feelings that she has, the situation that she's been put in. So I guess there's maybe something to do with that consistent relatability that maybe transcends, because so many things go out of fashion. And,
right.
So many movies you go back and watch that don't hold up now because they're a bit racist, they're a bit sexist, a bit transphobic, or they're just not funny or not relevant anymore. So I guess maybe you need something that allows it to be both old but still evergreen and still relevant.
Right. I mean, what do you think that is in terms of role-playing games?
Well, it's hard, isn't it? Because like obviously we've spoken before, and this is not to dunk on D&D by any means, but it's so prevalent in the industry that sometimes it's hard to get people to try something different. And I again, as I say, not wishing to dunk on D&D, I don't think that's necessarily down to quality. I think that's purely down to volume of kind of player base, because it's a weird old hobby, role playing, because you need the system, and you need the world, and you need the adventures and stories that you're doing, and the monsters and creatures, all that kind of stuff. But you also need a bunch of other people who are also invested in the same thing as you at the same time, to kind of play through those stories with you. So I guess there's that many more fragile variables that can make it kind of drop. And so I don't know. I mean, I guess in terms of I just don't know what it is that makes, the secret sauce, the magic pixie dust,
right?
That kind of lets things break through, and how much of it's artistic and how much of it's commercial, which is the perennial struggle for those in the creative industries, isn't it? But
I'm just going to jump in and say Erin can neither see nor hear us. I'm chatting with her on Facebook. And so I've asked her to leave and rejoin. It was all fine before we went live, I promise, wasn't it? We had a whole really good chat. I was like, save that for the live version.
Yeah, well, we'll push on. And hopefully she can jump back in
the
any
meantime,
minute.
I'm going to bring up the comment. So I'll keep the pre-submitted questions, which were specifically for Erin, and I'll just bring up some in the comment chat. So is influence a relevant criterion? Depressingly, by that definition, Mr. Keane is a classic.
His classic doesn't necessarily mean good, does it? It just means, classic art.
Can you hear me now?
Yay!
Okay.
You didn't miss anything. We were just killing time.
I didn't know. Okay, good.
We haven't done any of the pre-submitted questions.
Okay.
It was just Andy,
Okay,
Andy
I have no
having a wee chat.
I have no idea what happened, but
you're back now.
That's live. I was going to say that's live TV, but it's not TV. You know what I mean?
I was just going to ask you, Erin, if you wanted to say hi, introduce yourself, and then we'll get into the questions. But your blank face showed us you could neither see nor hear us.
Okay. Hi, I'm Erin. I'm usually referred to as Scribble Imp, which to this day I'm still not sure if I want to get rid of.
No, I wouldn't. No,
I like it.
Oh, okay. Well, there we go. Public has spoken. I'm an illustrator, and I've done mostly a lot of work on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and currently I think I'm still a little earlier in the process than a lot of people probably have had in, but I'm pushing forward to create more things. So yeah.
And what are you, just because it's relevant, could you just maybe say again what you told us before the stream? So why was this your choice of topic?
Okay. So the idea for this was, recently I've been thinking a lot about when you're trying to create something new, especially when you're really passionate about it. And I don't know what that was. So I've been working with a friend of mine, Jenna Bard, which is a great name for a writer. And we've been working on developing, like, my first attempt at a roleplay game. It's just as a proposal stage with like a mini version of everything. And it makes me wonder, what do you do, or what is the formula, I guess, if you're trying to make something that becomes a classic, something we'll want to play for the next 20, 30, 40 years, continue to evolve, keep getting expansions, and really get into the kind of the psyche of the public, and not just kind of potentially the people who, the small community of people who maybe rally around it, which is obviously, it's still lovely for that, but just like, what does it take to kind of expand beyond that? And that's kind of made me wonder, is like, maybe this would be interesting to discuss.
Here's a question from World. So we've got quite a few of the World Anvil stream popping in, including the World Anvil herself, who's asked, do you think a classic game has to have its own system, or can it use a pre-existing one?
I would say it's not about necessarily using a pre-existing system. I would think it's about the ease of access and maybe familiarity. I cannot say that word. I think I said before we went on live that there were at this kind of high-paced saturation of kind of media in every form. So I think there's an element of things being more easily tangible. So you're not sitting for hours trying to read over books and books and books potentially. So I don't think it's necessary, but I think there's a balance that could maybe be set up. But I don't know what your opinion is.
Yeah, I mean, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Seago, as ever, has an opinion. World Anvil, that would be a classic setting, not a system. I just think that's so funny. Sorry, Mark, on you go.
Just what qualifies as what we're talking about the classic. Is it the game? Is it the setting? Is it the player experience that defines classic gaming? And if so, it would seem to me that the system is less important than what happens when everybody sat around the table. Oh, that was a classic. Whether it's a classic evening, whether it's a classic adventure, a classic campaign. I played campaigns back in my teenage years that stretched for 4 years, which at the time seemed like a ridiculously long time. Spent 3 years playing the same RuneQuest characters. Now 3 years seems like, oh yes, that's no time at all. But when you're that much younger, the amount of time and effort you invest in something, it sort of becomes classic almost by default.
I think we should just talk about, because we have to talk about it, I think, if you're talking about a classic, and that is the ubiquity and the hooverness of D&D. So like when I'm amongst grown-ups and I have to explain what my husband does or what I do in my spare time, it's D&D that I have to reference, because they wouldn't understand what I'm talking about if I didn't use those three little, that acronym. Yeah, so they might, and then if I said Warhammer when we were working on Wifrup, they would think I meant like toy soldiers. They wouldn't think I meant, and they wouldn't understand a role-playing game, except through the kind of cipher of D&D. And even if they weren't really sure, they would know it from things like Stranger Things. They would know it if they'd watched E.T. when they were a kid. You would say role-playing, like D&D, and that's what people understand role-playing to be.
I guess that's kind of what we're questioning. D&D is kind of the core element of the discussion in a lot of ways, is can there be another D&D or something comparative? And then the question is, can you do it without being similar to D&D? It's obviously, I don't think there's a specific answer, but it's just something we're wondering about, really.
Yeah, and I think John's question there is good. Is D&D is ubiquitous, but is it actually classic? And I think possibly not, because D&D, the system, or more than that, the container for the system, because there's all the different editions within it as well. But it's not pinned to like a single world or a single campaign tone, even although it's all a bit high fantasy. So perhaps that ubiquity and that universality, ironically, makes it not a classic, makes it popular, but not quite having that special sauce that makes it a classic.
Because there's so much of it. Yeah. Well, you say, Empire of the Petal Throne was a classic. Well, of course, because 8 people played it, it becomes there's almost like a classic status attached to it, because it was and
also because it's not one thing. Like D&D almost, it's sound controversial, but almost isn't a game. It's it's an umbrella term for lots of other types of games. And that's if I was trying thinking about the whole nostalgia member berry stuff that we were kind of talking about before, when I was a sort of kid or / teenager, and I didn't play a lot of D&D, but what I did, it was all Dragonlance stuff, and it was when the Dragonlance novels were coming out. So for me, if there was classic D&D, it would be Dragonlance, because that's what I associate with my youth and my early exposure, that I then didn't play it for ages. So now as an adult looking back on it, that would be the closest I would have to that. But yeah.
So Mark says maybe a good way to go about it would be to see what consensus is. Everyone vote for top 5 classics, see what appears consistently, and see what they have in common. So right, go. Everyone in the comments, go.
Yeah, this is going to end in war, isn't it? Historians will look back and they'll say, what was it that instigated the Third World War? What was the argument that finally broke the internet? And this was it.
I'll take that. I'll take that mantle. I'll be happy to be responsible for that. I think talking about what was quite interesting about everyone's, even on something like that you have your own idea of what you relate to in that kind of D&D, or that what is classic to you, is quite interesting, because I think about, say, when I started playing Magic the Gathering, what for me is the kind of key groundwork of that, which is kind of to me classic, because I didn't play early days. I started playing in the kind of 2010s. So like my association is very different to someone who was playing like, 20 years ago. So I think that's quite interesting. It's like, but then I guess if something becomes that much of a juggernaut, then maybe that's part of being classic, is that you all relate to in your own way, but you all understand it collectively.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Rangdo. Rangdo forgot that I don't do acronyms. There's some acronyms I can do, and most of these, you'll be pleased to know, are acronyms that I can do. So let's just have a look. What has Rangdo said? Redbox D&D, Call of Cthulhu, Traveller, Wifrip, and Vampire the Masquerade.
You know what's interesting? Like Traveller, like that's a classic RPG, and I don't know why. I'm going to muse on that, but of that list, I'm like, Traveller stands out as being a classic, but I don't know why.
Yeah. Wifrip, Blades in the Dark, Dungeon World, SLA Industries, Shadowrun. Oh, yeah, Ghostbusters RPG, classic. Toon, Tunnels and Trolls, Wraith the Oblivion, and my homemade system that's the only true RPG. Well, yeah, so I said to my Andy, when he said, so Andy from Edinburgh asks, that's Andy Law, what do you feel is a single core ingredient required for a modern RPG classic? I said, obviously, any of our name is in the credits. Like, obviously. Anyway, Wifrip, Castle, Falkenstein, Star Wars D6, Redbox D&D, Vampire the Masquerade, and Call of Cthulhu, Vampire the Masquerade, Wifrip, Fate. What's BITD? Help me with that acronym.
Blades in the Dark.
Blades in the Dark. Oh, yeah, the thing that I just read out a minute ago. I'm surprised no one said Paranoia or RuneQuest. Like, to me, I guess maybe it's the ones you start with, but to me, like, Paranoia is just, like, such a classic role-playing game.
Yeah. And like, for me, and again, it's perhaps very much a question of when you started as well, isn't it? Because like for me, like it was like D&D Redbox, it was the Dragonlance stuff, and it was MERP as well, like the Middle Earth roleplay. Now I wouldn't say MERP is a classic system necessarily, but then you look at, I mean, and again, that's one of the things that was interesting when Francesco was on and we were talking about the One Ring and the sort of second edition of the One Ring. Like, it's really interesting that he's taken obviously a world that everybody knows really well from the books and the films, and also role players know really well from MERP, which is quite a successful role playing game sort of set in that world, and then made something else that I think, for me anyway, the One Ring feels like a modern classic actually, because it's got that combination of a new system that very cleverly matches the world that it's on, but the world brings the nostalgia with it because it's Tolkien. It's the bedrock of kind of modern fantasy. So that for me is probably the most modern classic that we've had would be the One Ring. But yeah.
Erin, oh no, I've forgotten. I was just about to ask you something and then I've forgotten.
My mind's going back to, as everybody starts talking about Traveller and Paranoia, I'm going, nobody's mentioned Gamma World or Metamorphosis Alpha. Come on. And everybody, exactly.
Everything a classic. Everything's a classic.
So Caravan has asked, and I'm going to let Erin jump into this one first, as it was her idea for the stream. So who determines a classic? Is it sales? Is it culture? Like, what is it? What makes it classic?
I think culture and time. I think if you're looking back 10 years and people are still talking about it or still evolving, it's still involved, I think it's time more than anything else if people are still actively engaging. I don't think there's necessarily a correct answer, but I think the fact that anyone still talks about something that's been around for a while, I think that's definitely a factor.
Yeah, I think like the more editions it has, then, or the longer time it has gone on and still produces new editions, is quite a good indication that it has become a classic, because it's refreshed for a new audience. So there has to be like an appetite for it to be refreshed. There have to be people who are willing to refresh it and work on it. And I just think, when I think about some of the longer lasting games, they're coming up as classics, and they also have like quite a number of editions that have been refreshed for a new generation.
But you also get unappreciated classics, right? Overlooked classics, which ones that didn't go through that. Again, with time, you go, that was a great game, and it's a shame not more people played it. So it becomes a subgenre of classic when it was sort of overlooked. Cult classic, of course, yeah,
Cult
exactly.
classic. There's a term.
Yeah.
There's a term.
Yes.
There's an official term.
So Seagoat says a classic is also something that inspires additional works. What, like fanfic for role-playing games?
Could do, yeah.
Yeah.
If they keep on doing it.
Call of Cthulhu. Oh, this is making, so Yusarian says this is making D&D seem like the ultimate classic game. Only in the same way a Hoover is an ultimate classic vacuum cleaner.
Because I think classic. I mean, I don't know, but to me, classic implies. I'm sorry to any D&D fans. I'm not dunking on D&D, but the term classic to me implies quality as well as that longevity. And some things have longevity, but they don't necessarily. Like Hoover. Like we use the term Hoover, but more people probably would rather have a Dyson these days.
Or a shark. Shark's where it's at now, Andy.
Is it?
Okay.
Times. Yeah. Sorry.
It's really good for cat. It's really good for cat hair.
So
brilliant idea. Everybody should get one of those.
So what's your shark? What's your shark RPG then, Andy? What's your Dyson RPG?
My Dyson RPG. What? Something that's out now.
And is, if not a classic, certainly destined to become one.
Oh.
That's what we're asking, aren't we? Like something that's out there that's going to be there in the annals of history.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's interesting what you were saying, Erin, about putting a new game together and how much thought you give to potentially investing classic traits in it, and is there a balance between just doing the game that you very much want to make, but with an eye to longevity for it? How do you balance that stuff in your head as you start putting ideas together?
I think that's been something that we've been thinking about, because the original idea, I'll give you a brief because I don't want to be like trying to promote something that doesn't even really exist. It was originally
we do it all the time.
I apologize because my cat's trying to get to the door.
Oh,
is this the little ginger cat? She's got a little.
It's because it heard us talking about hoovering up cat hair. That's
the irony is the project I'm looking at actually involves rodents, so maybe he thinks that's what it is.
Oh.
So originally the idea was meant to be a concept had for a video game where everything was going to be made out of physical objects, which I've wanted to do for years but never actually done. And then I was kind of thinking about maybe in the past year or so, it's like this might work better as a roleplay thing, and it just evolved the idea. So there was already concepts for expanding that world. So it's just like we could do a story, but then you think about like, oh, I'd love to do this bit, but it needs to progress on. It can't just be all in like one book, because like, so you go like, I hope this does well, so then I can tell more stories. I have more stories and concepts to evolve, and you want it to become, I guess, or something classic, something new additions, so you can keep on telling the stories that you want to tell, or creating the worlds or the concepts. But yeah, the game, like we've been trying to balance it because it's like that kind of element of combat versus kind of roleplay. My friend Jenna, who's developing with me, is really into like heavy roleplay elements of games, and we've found a kind of accessible balancing system, which is any interaction, be it combat or roleplay, all rewards similar elements that can be then used for developing your character. So it's like you can roleplay the crap out of a town and still get benefits rather than always having to do combat. So I think from what we think so far, it's accessible enough, but also playing to the world it's in, because it's basically you play as rodents in the world past humanity, and they built their own civilization, but they don't know humans ever existed, but they're living in like the wastes of humanity, but in a kind of nice way, not in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, even though it kind of somewhat is. But I don't like to phrase it as post-apocalyptic because it's not the vibe I'm going for. It's more kind of, I don't really, we're still developing it. But yeah, so like we've got like the elements of the game, you get points from different things, and one of them is called Wits and Ways, and one is called Nimble Fingers, and it's playing on the ideas of the characters without pulling yourself too deep into that it's not relatable enough.
John suggests post-humanity.
Yeah, post-humanity. That's probably a good way of describing it. Post-humanity, yeah, rather than post-apocalypse. Yeah.
Yeah, so Mark suggests maybe classic is partly retrospective if with hindsight your novel prefigures a massive literary genre, it is post hoc a classic regardless of how it was received at first. And Rangdo said that's why I cited Vampire the Masquerade as a classic. It was definitely a paradigm shift.
And yeah, on that, we were talking about Blades in the Dark, actually, as potentially being another kind of modern one that does something quite different, that then I think thereafter, I think it'd be hard to design a new game now without thinking about what Blades in the Dark have done, in the same way that after Vampire and the World of Darkness, it was hard to, design a role-playing game that wasn't influenced by that. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Mark says paradigm shift is a good term to have in the discussion.
Yeah, I wonder if that's what it is. I wonder if it's the sense of it creating, almost creating a genre within the wider role-playing genre.
So Zoltan has asked, there are tons of RPG games, how to make the game stand out from the rest. I like a minigame. Rules within rules within rules. And I also like an achievement system, personally.
Yeah. I mean, I would argue it is the problem making yourself stand out. I think it's finding the sweet spot between standing out and also being familiar, because I think that the world is full of brilliant games that are really clever and really different, but nobody's playing them because they're so different that nobody's playing them. It's
also dealing with. Sorry.
No, carry on.
I think there's also that element of it's went from a world where you look back at the kind of early days of role play games where there was a kind of personal investment to playing a game. You had to go to a shop or you had to find your people. And now it's just everything's everywhere. There's like so much. So you're kind of going from being kind of in somewhat of a drought to basically being in an ocean, and you have to pick a droplet. And it doesn't mean that droplet's the best droplet. It's just maybe the loudest droplet, or the droplet that's paid the most to be there, or just it's a weird place. It's like someone could write the best novel in the world in a hut in the desert and then bury it in the ground. It doesn't mean it was not good. It doesn't mean it wouldn't have changed the world. It just no one's ever going to see it. So I guess comes anything creative, really.
Yeah, and that's huge. That's huge these days. Again, with the sort of shift in the way products are marketed to us as individuals or as communities as a whole. Where are we plumbed into the right channels, receiving the correct information, the stuff that really interests us, or is it just, as you say, who's paid the most to get out there, which publisher has got the ear or the eye of a potential audience, and great stuff falls through the cracks. Great stuff doesn't even get published.
Yeah, that was somber.
Yeah.
Really took the wind out of our sails there.
Oh, shit, sorry.
Just in a ditch somewhere, there's just a book of the best roleplay game ever, just sitting there, the rain splashing onto the autumn evening.
That sounds like an interesting world for a setting of an RPG.
But
the world of forgotten stories.
On the plus side,
I like that.
Well, there you go.
Make a note of that.
Make a note of that. But also on the plus side, with self-publishing, to try and put a more positive spin on it. Self-publishing, kickstarting, all that kind of stuff. Now there's also
and the whole zine game culture as well. There's lots of people making little independent things that are low budget, small, low production value, but therefore cheap and cheerful, and people can get them.
I'm thinking of a sequel for James Wallace, so I just felt compelled to bring this up, talking about the best games ever made. So James Wallace's book was out 2 days ago, and he has just written a book about the greatest board games ever made. So I'll be asking him for a sequel now on RPGs. I'm sure he'll be happy to comply.
Or I would 100% bet James has got opinions on this topic.
Oh yeah, totally.
You should definitely revisit it with him.
Yeah.
Maybe just get him just to record a monologue for us.
Yeah.
Cyberpunk that Rangdo's just mentioned there. Actually, that was one that had come up to me as well in terms of one that's defined a genre. Yeah, absolutely. And obviously it drew on literary cyberpunk in order to make that world, but it really did. Yeah, it is quite a profound change. And again, it's a paradigm shift.
I don't know about everyone else, but in Cyberpunk, like there was always a formula that our our adventures followed. We'd start in a bar. You know, we'd get approached with a job. It was very like a fantasy game, except there were more guns. Like, it was just the same. We got into some trouble, and it ended up with a shootout in that bar almost every single time, and someone having to be medevaced, like the only rich player in the party.
So it was Neon Fantasy.
Yeah, basically.
Which sounds like a name for something. Neon Fantasy.
Yeah, it does.
I mean, it sounds like a certain type of establishment you might visit on a stag do, but yeah.
Actually, yeah, that too. I've just been playing Ascent, and I'm just like, just that grimy neon thing. I'm just sitting there going, I love this so much. I'm just like, I don't want to actually do anything. I just want to look at the layers of beauty.
I think it sounds like that we're almost coming up with a classic for each genre of RPG.
Yeah.
Like we're falling into those.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying is I mean, I don't know, but I'm wondering if that's sort of what makes it a classic is that it ultimately creates a genre around it. Because there probably were RPGs touching on cyberpunk themes before cyberpunk came out, but I think cyberpunk was the one that pushed it over the end. And some people have mentioned, like for instance, Shadowrun, which is great because it's got the fusion of fantasy and cyberpunk, but you couldn't have had it without cyberpunk. And you know, I would argue that cyberpunk is a more of a paradigm shift than Shadowrun, but yeah, but maybe I'm wrong.
Cyberpunk is life goals. Like I totally want a full body conversion into a cat. Always have done. Always will do.
Wouldn't have guessed.
It is what it is.
Yeah. And you're going to go cyber psycho and start killing us all, but that's fine.
No,
that's fine.
That would never happen to me.
I have 3 tattoos, 2 small ones about this big. And I have one that covers my entire left leg, which basically looks like I've got a cyber leg.
Nice.
So it's like I have 3 tattoos, but one of them covers my whole leg.
Nice. So Seagoat has opinions. Seagoat always has opinions. For an RPG, it would need to be easy to understand, easy to pick up and play for beginners, be memorable, and have a world players want to be in.
Is that all?
I think the ease of accessibility, and I think today is key. I think people don't want to spend forever learning. If they can sit down with some friends and get some of the basics in an evening, I think that's very valuable right now. Even if it's like the basics and you keep on, it expands as you go on. Almost like playing a video game where you gradually get your functions as you go along. The tutorial, so it's like, okay, you can do this. Oh, but now you need to be able to do this because it's important. So it's almost kind of like you could approach it in that way. So it's more accessible.
Totally. There's a phrase we use in teaching when you're planning lessons, a low floor and a high ceiling. And I think that's what you need, is you need that low floor for accessibility, but then you've got the scope for increased complexity and sophistication of play as you go on. Indeed, it's very much what, as we talked about in our birthday stream about Dark Deeds, it's very much what works so well with Dark Deeds, is that it's really simple to wrap your head around the basics, but there's actually a lot of depth and complexity there in terms of how you play it. So,
Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay was the first. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay starter set was the first roleplay game I've ever done any work on because of Andy Law.
I think so. If Andy Law were here, he'd have a lot to say about this because he does think very deeply about what makes games good, what makes them good to GM, what makes them good to play, what gives them replayability. And you know, the starter set was a good example of that, of coming up with something that he thought would be a really good introduction. But I know he likes scalability, so it has to be something that you can keep on playing. You can play it when you're little neonates, if you use the vampire example, and you can play it when you're elders. But also, and it's probably why I'm fond of a mini game, like he is fond of games within games and elegant rules with huge numbers of statistics behind them to make sure that they work. But then when they're actually in place, you wouldn't ever know that because they're simple and they're easy and they're intuitive for players. So I certainly can never get into games where the rules are just not, where it takes too long to understand the rules, or the rules are hard to explain. And I think, Erin, you make a really good point about video games. Video games do that really well in introducing you like to that unfolding complexity.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a starter set's good for that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and you can tell bad video games when they don't do that well. You know, when you're playing a game and you've been playing it for 6 months, and then suddenly you're, oh, if I could have done that the whole time, but I didn't know that was even a function for me. I've been playing this game on hard mode the whole time because it never explained something. So
yeah. It's also, I think, kind of how easily it explains it to you. I think you can get, like, in video games, are very bogged down in text explanations, and you're like, I don't want to. You're just like, I'm dyslexic, and I'm not reading this unless it's something important. And if it's something important, make it. Don't put it in a character conversation or something. If it's actually gameplay structured, give it as a wee kind of pop up that goes, okay, I understand that's an instruction. But if it's sometimes like, I'm going to talk to you as if I'm in your universe, but also not. And it's like, that's weird. That's very weird. My immersion has been shattered because this NPC just mentioned button A. What?
Yeah.
I mean, it's really weird.
It's the one thing that you said about sort of the learning curve and stuff like that. There's also, I mean, video games. There's the sort of the pushback against that now, where games are intentionally murderous from the offset. And if you can't cope with that, well, I guess it's just not for you. I'm thinking of the Dark Souls games. They take pride in that. And again, those are classic games, but they are not for everybody. You know, they are very much kind of, you need to have that hardcore mentality to sort of truly embrace them, but they are still a classic. So
has anyone been playing, sorry, I was just going to say, has anyone been playing God of War? Because the new game is an absolute masterclass in accessibility. Like, they've thought of everything you could possibly think of seems to be in that game as an option. You know, if you are colorblind and you need like a subtly different way of showing characters that are important, then it has ways to do that. It's just got so many different things.
Oh, wow.
That's good.
I've still not played the first one. I should probably do that.
Yeah.
I think I have it. I'm pretty sure I have it on PlayStation Plus, so I probably should.
Yeah, you got to go back. I mean, how many God of War do we now?
Go to God of War 1 in the PS2. Yeah, God of War 1.
Yeah. They've been making them for a while.
I think in terms of like mentioning kind of off the back of that is something that maybe is we're I guess we're trying to still define what classic means, but something that inspires. So it's this idea that whatever something. There's these elements, like, is it because it keeps getting, you know, new editions, it's always getting new content, but also I think, does it inspire people so it becomes more than just its own center? It becomes other things, it becomes books, it becomes, I know, whatever. I think that's a big kind of a powerful element, which I guess we go back to talking about D&D, but other things have had the same thing to maybe a slightly lesser degree.
It's why, so this is interesting because just building on that, Long Shadows is a classic defined by the stories you tell. Vampire has personal horror where you fight to keep your humanity. Withrop has the whole enemy within campaign and that struggle against chaos. And I guess that's why I always struggled with things like the One Ring, because to me, that world is quite, there's a story in that world and you're not going to be playing that story. And so I always struggle to see what's the point, what is the journey, what is the growth, whereas in Vampire I could absolutely see that. In Withrop, that constant pull to chaos is take the easy / horrific way out, and so I think that Long Shadow has a really good point there, that it's something about like, what's the story? What's the underlying world and what's the meaning? What does it tell us about being human or not being human? Because that's why I role play, to understand myself, to understand other people, and to listen to and tell good stories.
And I think, I mean, essentially, just to both agree and disagree with you simultaneously, that's actually why I think the One Ring, particularly the second edition, is a modern classic, because like Francesco's added that. Like in MERP, it wasn't that. You were always either you were hanging around in the fringes or you're retelling the story of the novel. Whereas he's added that whole idea of the shadow and the kind of the influence of that on you, which is something that is in Tolkien's work. The idea that you know, people might fall to shadow, they might give in to despair and you know, become the baddies. And there's an element of that in there now. So it's about fighting the fight. It's about, you know, which I think is thematically quite Quite important.
Yeah, I think you'd want to do that. Otherwise, you have to, as a GM playing running an adventure in Tolkien's world. If you're not going to be dragging people into the big story, you've almost got to keep pushing them away from it.
Yeah.
And you kind of no, you sort of the whole world ultimately gets caught, the whole Middle Earth gets caught up in it. Even the Shire. So you sort of you want to have elements of that, whatever your adventuring was, if wandering through the troll shores, you'd still want a little bit of that darkness, that the battle between good and evil still sort of hovering there somewhere in the background.
There is so many comments. We've inspired so much today. I can't even keep up. But I just have to mention, whereas Star Wars doesn't have that issue, Andor being a clear example of what you can do.
But,
can I just say, Andor is the best television I have ever watched.
It's incredible.
Drops mic, leaves stream.
Yeah, it's incredible. But I would say, like 30 years ago, Star Wars did have that problem. I think that's the point I'm trying to make, is that I don't think it's hard baked into the universe whether you can or can't tell those kind of stories. I just think you have to be creative in terms of how you tell those stories. I don't see any difference between the Star Wars world and Andor and the kind of stories you could tell in the One Ring inside Tolkien's world. It's in the same way that the One Ring is going to end up in Mount Doom, the Death Star is going to end up getting blown up by Luke Skywalker. But that doesn't mean that you can't tell brilliant stories with, to do with kind of personal
spoilers.
Spoilers, Andy. Erin, what do you think?
I guess that comes down to kind of the world, the world building element of it is, because a lot of these kind of franchises, you come to it because of the big story that you do not get to take part in. I guess that is a challenge. But if I guess the system in the world is expansive enough that you can make your own stories. Emotionally, for you as a player, as invested as taking out the Death Star, as much as say you're going to the dodgy cantina and you need to take down the mob boss, but to your experience that you have, it is as significant. I guess that does come down to the world building tools that you and your GM have and the rule system that's set in place. Because as much as people are now got to that point when you're looking at Star Wars, not everyone wants to have the lightsaber anymore. They've grown a bit tired of it. Saying that, I still have dreams where I have a lightsaber and I wake up and think it's real and I'm really annoyed. I am 33 and I still have those dreams.
Fair.
They don't stop, Erin.
No.
I look forward. Well, hopefully the longevity of the dream will be substantial enough. It's like having dreams where I can fly or have telekinetic powers. They happen a lot as well. So I need lightsabers, light, and telekinetic powers game, please.
I'd be really interested. It's for another stream, but I'd be really interested to hear the mechanism of how you fly, because I have a very particular one that's quite a stressful way to fly in a dream, and I'd quite like to know about other people's methods of flying in dreams.
My flying, anytime I have a dream of flying, it's shit flying. It's the worst flying. It's just hovering along horizontally and bumping into things the whole time.
Oh, right. No, mine is like the power of my mind, but I sort of have to catch thermals, and it's always really stressful as to whether next leap, the next thermal will actually keep me flying. It's pretty stressful.
Yeah.
Mine usually feels like muscle tension and lifting from the stomach.
Yeah.
A little bit like that, but usually it's not uncomfortable. It's just I don't trust that I'm not going to suddenly just go.
Exactly.
But it's not
mine
stressful.
is like constant mental pressure. Like you have to fly.
Like a bird. Like a bird.
Yeah.
There's some really interesting chat in the comments of all the different ways people imagine flying in their dreams. It's lovely.
I've had big giant bird wings, and when I was a teenager, and then I went through a period of drawing bird wings a lot, and it was because I had a dream where I could fly, but it was in a really boring place, near my school, and it wasn't even an exciting, fantastical world. It was I was just flying up the road on the route where I took to school.
Yeah.
My very first dream of flying, I must have been 4, and I made my own wings from my mum's craft box, which was full of feathers. I'm allergic to feathers, by the way. And then I flew to my friend Katie's house to have a play, but I flew there down the roads instead of going straight across the field.
That's adorable. That is absolutely adorable. It should be a children's storybook.
It should actually, shouldn't it? I'm going to write that. This is basically Ranjo. This is basically mine and Andy Law's life. We've just tangentified into what Andy and I usually talk about. So sorry, it was bound to happen one day. Anyway, Oh, there's just too many comments today. I haven't had
I
flying
like
things
John
for
Lane's one.
years.
Yeah.
But when I do, they're always of me walking through the air in an exaggerated
Like
stride.
I don't mean I don't always remember, although since COVID I remember my dreams more than I used to, but I don't ever really remember dreaming about flying, but I do dream about teleporting. I don't know what that says. If it says I'm lazy, maybe, I don't know. But yeah,
I don't even know. Like, I've totally lost track. Yossarian, Vampire the Masquerade has rules for this. For flying, for
lightsabers,
for lightsabers. Like, I just don't know anymore. By the way, I watched Rogue One for the first time yesterday because for some reason I had never watched it. That was not the right way round to watch those two pieces of media if you wanted to be at all not devastated. Just gonna say that. Right, I'm gonna find us right. Here's a pen and paper question. Back on track. Zoltan asks: nowadays we see RPG books printed in colors with quality paper and amazing art. Is it that much needed?
No.
Yes. Otherwise, I don't have a proper job.
Well, I say no. I only say no because we're doing Crown in black and white. But quality paper and amazing art, yes.
And amazing art, yeah.
Fine, okay then.
Yeah. Not the color. Color, not so much. Yeah. What it needs is good aesthetics. Whether those aesthetics are full color, because I think there are some beautiful books out there that make some incredible use of color. But there are some books out there that look like a unicorn vomited all over them, and it's a total mess.
Like Unicorn Vomit Adventures.
Yeah,
that's what you're going for.
Yeah, I mean it is interesting. Like I did mention before, all the kind of the zine sort of style that you can kind of get, and there's some really interesting ones. I got one called Lost Roads a couple of years ago. That was part of Zine Quest. That they've got some lovely art. It's really quite simplistic art. It's not developed, but deliberately so. It's kind of very evocative. And that's really nice.
I think that's it. A powerful aesthetic, whether that's color or quality paper or amazing art. It's just something about. I mean, personally, I an RPG book. I wanted to draw me into the world, whatever that world needs. From me or whatever it takes for me to connect with it. It could be the quality of the art or the quality of the paper. It could be anything. And conversely, it might be quite the opposite. It could be pared down and basic and lo-fi. That might be what the inspiration.
For me, it's definitely if I can have something as a physical book, that's also always what I'll pick. But I think it's that investment of it, and it's kind of it also, like, if you look at something digitally, it can be a more distracting environment, whereas the book is easier to become absorbed with. And it's the tangibility, especially when you're talking something built with the imagination, it gives you like almost like an anchor. If you will. Yes. And even though I have dyslexia, I have something fascination with books in general. This idea that it's information locked within a tome is something and even particularly like role play books or anything kind of fictionalized or something, or like my boyfriend works in historic environment in Scotland and as a librarian, so I was in his work and looking at a book on carvings and Neolithic carvings and stuff, and it's just there's something very magical, and I think that follows through in print media, particularly when you get like a nice hardback or something.
Oh, I agree. Yeah. I don't feel I've got my money's worth if all I've got is a digital copy of something.
Yeah.
Like, I understand that obviously depending on how your publication or whatever if you're a publisher, your business might be that doesn't work necessarily as easily, especially when you're doing international distribution. It's understandable, but if you do get the opportunity for that, it is very nice. But obviously, circumstance, like I have a friend who's a publisher and he's having an absolute nightmare trying to get things printed right now. And so you can, like, logistically, I can understand that, but when you can, it's a good thing to get.
My cat is just howling outside my door. Like, I think he heard your cat, Erin. It's like
it'll be the kitten probably, because he's absolute menace right now.
So if we didn't have full color art, we wouldn't have the marvelous picture of Rudy Klumpenklug.
Seriously, I had to ask someone. Like, it was like I posted it because someone had mentioned something about it in like a Facebook group, the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Facebook group, and I posted as like it had been like 2 years, and it was really because like I said, I've not actually played the game, and this is the kind of thing I've never actually played a game because I don't have people to play with, so I've just got some books and stuff, and I'm like, people seem obsessed with this character in a negative way, but in also a fun negative way, and then people told me their stories, and there was like 200 comments on this group just talking about this character. I was like, bloody hell, what did you guys write? I just got a sketch and I did that as a test illustration. And what became of this beast?
Yeah,
Sean
he's
loves-
like
loves-
without spoiling anything in the
Yeah,
starter
no
set.
spoilers, because
he's
I
the-
haven't read the starter set,
Well,
Andy.
and that's what I literally said without spoiling anything. He's the NPC that your PCs kind of have most interaction with in the starter set. So you basically end up with him, and he's their kind of he's the one who gives you an introduction into the world of Warhammer and the sort of the CD nature of it. And he is funny and charming at times, but he is also something of an antagonist at times. And yeah, he's very, very memorable. There's even, I don't know if they still exist, but there was somebody who had a Facebook account that posted as him, that just put comments in, and anybody chatting with it would post as if they were Ridgy, talking in character, and it was very funny. I've no idea who it was behind that profile, but it made me laugh a lot. So, yeah.
Oh yeah, the profile, because I sent them the picture because I was like, okay, I'll send you like the digital version I have so you don't have to rip it from something. So
Nice.
I still don't know who it was, but I sent it to them. It's like, okay, here's like a PNG file so you can snack on something else if you want.
Yeah.
Long Shadow says an essential for any book is readability. I have seen some beautiful books that are let down by the text being really hard to read. Yeah.
Accessibility definitely seems to be something coming up a lot with all these ideas, is how easily can you get into the game.
And the Seagull says color isn't needed. Sell black and white line art with a pack of crayons and let them color it in themselves.
I have plans.
If you sell the crayons yourself, that's a good business move.
Yeah, I have plans for that.
Do you?
Coloring book. Yeah.
Good. Excellent.
I like it. Like not being funny, Mark, but like like a lot of the stuff you've done, like I suppose Games Workshop probably owns the copyright to them, doesn't it? All the Eldar ones and things, but
I can't. Yeah, man.
I would absolutely
I have to talk about this stuff all the time. I can't. Oh, when are you going to do a book? When are you going to do this? Or a coloring book would be awesome. But they would bring the hammer down, the Warhammer down very hard.
Yeah. Because I would absolutely buy a coloring book of all your Eldar works, but
that's never going to happen.
No, unless they decide to monetize it.
Oh yeah. In which case, I won't see a penny.
Yeah.
So I think we've got time for this one. So Zoltan has asked, if you want to create an RPG that has a similar vibe than an old one, let's say Wifrip, what do you have to do to ensure it's not a pale copy of the original? How to make it better?
I mean, that's something with certainly with the Coil Crown, considering our collective backgrounds, it's certainly we're very cognizant of the shadow of Warhammer that looms over us, and trying to, and I suppose we do sit and think, okay, well, if this was a Warhammer scenario, these are Warhammer characters, what can we do to differentiate? What can we do to give them a fresh personality or spin things and add some unique depth to them? I think we're very aware of what we've done before, and if we want to make what we do classic, a modern classic, put effort and consider the possibilities of bringing new stuff and new ideas to the table that would hopefully give what we do the sort of resonance that things like Enemy Within have had over the decades.
Yeah, and that's it. And I think like finding ways to innovate, like whether that's in terms of rules design, whether that's in terms of storytelling, characters, whatever, but retaining remaining true to the tone. It's a tricky balancing act, but I think you're absolutely right, Mark. And I think like I don't think it's come up in a while, but we have spoken about it before. But the concept of ludonarrative dissonance, when you're playing a game and the rules don't match the tone of what you're playing, of the story. So like the Uncharted games is the one that always comes up, where you're killing literally hundreds of people, but yet your character's quipping and having a laugh, and it just jars, and they kind of don't belong. And I think like often when you look at systems, older systems particularly, there's an element of that where the rules are fighting against the story that you want to tell, rather than complementing the story that you want to tell. Which is what encourages people, like so many WFRP GMs complain about their players becoming murder hobos. It's the phrase that they use, just wandering around killing people for loot, because armor is so expensive that if they kill someone with armor, they can just sell that armor, and that they'll get better rewarded than if they follow the plot hook in the adventure. And like, you know, that's an example of the mechanics you're using to tell the story not supporting the kind of story that you want to tell. I think like innovating to smooth that out so that the way you're telling the story is absolutely hand in hand with the story that you're trying to tell. Like that's the gold standard in quality, and I think that's the gold standard in innovation. And ultimately, I think maybe that's what makes a game a classic. But then, of course, time moves on and tastes change, and you know. But
I'm going to have to do the draw. So I just wanted to draw attention to Martin's little comment here. I got here late and I'm only now checking out scribbleimp.com, but that's amazing art, not just the glorious WFRP art, but also the more Mobius-esque comic art.
Thank you.
And Roderick says, hands up who thinks Andy Leaf made a bet that he could fit Ludo narrative dissonance into the
Nah. I wish.
Check your bingo. Everybody check your bingo card.
Well, you have no idea how much I've been biting my tongue to not talk about Conspiracy X in this game, because it's become a thing I always talk about. So and then I just spoiled it.
And then the final thought, on the plus side, maybe someone will decide your work is a classic long after we're all dead.
There you go.
Maybe. Yeah, there we go.
On a cheery note.
On that cheery note, I am going to we have put these into random thingy majiggly thing, and I have been passed the results, and now here they are. So the first prize that I am announcing today, let me just get rid of this comment. Andy, do that for me, would you? Okay, thanks, bye. Thank you. So the first one was gifted by Phil Harris. It is the Closed Circle graphic novel, signed first copy, and that has been won by @BillyMischief on Twitter.
Congratulations, Billy.
Congratulations.
Or Mr. Mischief, if you prefer.
Yeah.
The next one is the second copy, also signed, but with a slightly different inscription, gifted by Phil, and that has been won by @FilmFam68 on Twitter. So for all these prizes, just getting... Oh my gosh. What happened there?
The camera I'm using times out. The bits will go away.
I was expecting that. Remember the creepy girl from back in the past?
Yeah.
I was expecting that. Yeah.
I was too. So Graham has gifted a copy of Dead Lead in the Mail, Masterpieces from the Queens of Horror, edited by himself. And that has been won by the Viscountessa, she/her, on Discord.
Of course.
Next up is Down Darker Trails for Call of Cthulhu. And that has been won by Long Shadow on Discord.
It seems that there's lots of appropriate winners for those things that they're picking
it's
up.
true.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Long Shadow, I think, is in the chat as well. Congratulations, Long Shadow.
I think Long Shadow maybe won a prize last week as well. Was it Long Shadow? Next is Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay's 4th edition rulebook, signed by a number of us who worked on it. I think at least 3. And that has been won by Craig Bunce on Discord.
Congratulations.
And then congratulations, Craig. And then finally, I hate saying this one, Masks of Nyarlathotep for Call of Cthulhu. Thank you very much. Which has been won by Mark DG, one of our patrons.
Hey.
Congratulations to Mark.
It's not me. I'd like to point out that's not me. Those are my initials. It's not me.
It is not you. So congratulations to all our winners. Just get in touch with the Rookery. Andy will be better soon. No, seriously. Just get in touch with us on whatever platform you put your entry in and won the prize on, and it will either be sent to you if it was a PDF, or I will be wrapping them up and sending them to the post office next week. So congratulations to everyone.
Congrats. Well done,
Some
everybody.
lovely prizes, yeah.
So thanks to Erin. Thank you for joining us. I'll just take Mark's name off the screen there. Thanks to my fellow Rooks, thanks to everyone's watching, and also, as always, thanks to our wonderful patrons, our Discord community, and everyone who makes Inside the Rookery possible. So join me next week when I'll be talking to Matt Ryan about excellent RPG maps, when I can only hope that our resident plague doctor has done their Covidian magic on Andy Law and whisked him back to health, because I'll really want him to be there to talk about maps, as I'm sure will our audience. But until then, thank you so much for coming on, Erin. I feel like we got through a lot, but also hardly anything at all. So you'll have to come back on again and chat to us in future.
It was very fun. It was very fun, and first time I've ever really done anything like this. So, yeah.
Well, you were a dream guest, so thank
Awesome.
you for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
So until next week, all that remains to say is thank you, and goodbye for this evening. See you all soon.
Ta-ra!
Bye.